Welcome everyone, my name's Dom, and today we need to talk about this, the PlayStation Vita, for anybody who remembers what this is. This is an original 3G unit, and there's a lot to talk about with this. With the upcoming closure of the PSP, PS3, and Vita digital stores, I really wanted to kind of take a deep dive into this device and talk about whether or not this thing, which didn't sell all that well, was a complete failure. So let's get into it.
Allow me to introduce myself. Who knows what dastardly crime he might perpetrate next?
He's a very clever arch criminal who must be put away. Another innocent victim.
So a brief history on the Vita, right? The Vita was initially announced in E3 for 2011 on June 6th. It was announced to be this successor to the wildly popular PlayStation Portable PSP. Remember my PSP, I know lots of people love their PSP, and it had like every piece of technology under the sun that you could possibly want. It had 3G, an OLED screen, front touchscreen, rear touchpad. It had GPS and dual cameras. And of course it had the dual joysticks, which was something that the PSP did not have, something that I really wish it would have had because, I mean, from a first-person shooter perspective, it makes sense. FPSs were becoming incredibly popular over the past several years surrounding the launch of the Vita. I mean, the thing was just loaded with everything that you could possibly want. And basically, it was kind of trying to enter the smartphone space by having smartphone-like features without actually being a phone. Since people had their cell phone already, a lot of those features, they were basically redundant. And I feel like the R&D and the money that Sony had put into putting these features into the Vita may have inhibited its ability to be even better than what it was, right? I don't think adding cameras to the Vita was going to add to the overall experience. I think increasing the screen resolution or battery life would have been a much better use of that money. Initial sales for the Vita were all in all not terrible. Japan sold 300,000 units, North America 200,000 units. However, by the second week, sales just plummeted by like 80%. The Vita was just not performing in either market. But while initial sales of the Vita were, lower than expected, Sony did not give up on it. They released a revised version of the Vita. It was 20% slimmer, 15% lighter. The OLED screen got ditched and it became an LCD screen, presumably to, reduce costs and what have you. It had an additional hour of battery life, but even then, it just didn't have the staying power. Sony released the PlayStation Vita TV, which was basically going to allow you to play your Vita games. It was a little box that you could plug into your TV. That did poorly. Vita, which was supposed to mean life, was not in anybody's life, and nobody could really figure out why. Like, it seemed like it had everything. It was, it was the successor to the wildly popular PSP. The Vita just looked like this promising device that was going to, take what the PSP, everything that the PSP lacked and kind of bring it into the modern era. And arguably, it did that. But the issue that the Vita really had was games. And to be honest with you, I would say that while the Vita itself was incredible in terms of emulating those PSP digital distribution games, as well as a lot of the PS1 classics, a lot of that stuff made the Vita do a lot more than, what it was, initially intended for, which I guess was to play Vita games. The Vita never got mainstream games the way that the PSP did. I mean, it had, it did have some good ones, right? It had Gravity Rush and Wipeout and Persona for Golden, which is probably the best game for the Vita. But the other games themselves, at least from my experience, the games always felt like they were this sort of wannabe mobile game, like this indie first kind of game. They never felt fully polished and formed the way that Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core did, or Monster Hunter for the PSP did, right? And there was a secondary hit where the Monster Hunter game that was supposedly going to be coming out for the Vita was now an exclusive to the 3DS, so it was just hit after hit after hit. And games themselves were just strange. I mean, the Killzone version for the Vita was weird. Every time you killed somebody, you got like currency, and it just didn't feel like a full-blown first-party experience, third-party, a Vita exclusive. It didn't feel as hardcore as some of the other games. It never felt dedicated, never felt real. It always felt like it was some kind of weird cash grab mobile competitor thing, and that's not what the people that this device was targeted for wanted. They wanted a hardcore, real gaming experience, a classic portable gaming experience, not mobile games. If they wanted mobile games, they already had a cell phone in their pocket they could play mobile games with. So yeah, when you put it all together, the Vita just didn't add up to, the modern hardcore gaming experience that it was supposed to be. All the technology that the Vita had makes for great marketing, But I don't think Sony was smart in putting as much money into R&D into adding 3G to the Vita, when the 3G component of the Vita was just to like update scores. Like you hear 3G, you see 3G, and you don't think about it in terms of communication when it comes to gaming. I was thinking about being able to play games online, on the go, first-person shooter over 3G online. That is not something that it did. That is not something that it could do. And while certain games could update via 3G, and it was kind of a mess, right? It just sent a bad signal to be like, well, why isn't it just 4G? Which, recently around the time of the release of the Vita, the iPhone 5, I think it was, that was coming out, that had 4G. Other devices were getting 4G LTE. Like, that would have been the way to go. Some of the other weaknesses that the Vita had was it didn't have good Wi-Fi. Like, it uses a 2.4, I think G. All things considered, that's a more or less slower standard than what was available at the time for Wi-Fi. Again, another reason why you ditch the cameras, ditch the GPS, ditch the 3G, and put that money into better hardware for the stuff that people were going to be using more frequently. The Vita could have been so much better as far as download speeds go, because downloading games took a little bit of some time, and it all ends up being the experience. Some of the ways that the Vita, I feel, got in the way was, for one, the proprietary memory cards. And I want to talk about this one for a bit, because the proprietary memory cards is probably one of the worst things about the Vita. They had a 4 gig, an 8 gig, 16 gig, 32 gig, and 64 gig. And the Vita itself didn't have any proprietary internal storage, which is problem number one. Problem number two is compounded onto problem number one when you're talking about proprietary memory cards, because the proprietary memory cards for a console that wanted to focus on digital distribution and sort of all your games in an app-like smartphone experience on the go, where everything is just, in your device. It's a problem to have proprietary memory cards, especially memory cards that you have to restart the console to swap out. It is not like just necessarily a hot swappable card. It has a lot of security built into it, and Sony puts a lot of security into their stuff. Nintendo tries to put a lot of security into their stuff because they hate pirates and piracy and hacking and all that other stuff, and that's what it all kind of boils down to. But that was not the way to do it. It should have used standard micro SD cards, and today you can get like 500 gigs, and you'd be able to load up today when they close down the store. Whether or not the store itself will continue to allow you to download the games that you bought but not buy new games, or if the store itself is closed down for good, at some point the only way you're going to be able to get your games is if you have them downloaded onto memory cards. And because the memory cards are the way that they are, backing them up can be a little bit of a hassle. And so it's an issue because the larger capacity memory cards were like notorious for failures. If you Google the 32 and 64 gig cards, you will see lots of people talking about how their card stopped working, it stopped getting read. I had a 32 gig card with hundreds and hundreds of hours that like shorted out, and I just can't get it to work. I don't know why. I don't know what happened. I don't know, what I could do, if it's even possible to recover that card. But that in and of itself is creating this mesh of just issues when it comes to keeping your titles and your games and your saves safe on your Vita. Sure, you can back it up, but it requires you to plug it in, go to a particular, the content manager thing that you can get for your computer or on a PS3. You could do your backups there, but it was all a process, right? It wasn't automated like the way we were getting used to with smartphones, just kind of doing a backup via the cloud every night when you go to bed. It was not a solution to keeping your content safe. And while the Vita itself did have the ability to upload, saves via PlayStation Plus or the cloud, it didn't necessarily do it automatically. So you just were never in a position where you were safe. And if you got a large memory card and it shorted, you were basically done. It's all just bad in the way that the memory card affects the experience of the game. The cartridges themselves, since they didn't make many Vitas, there's probably not a lot of cartridges out there that you can buy third party. Sure, you can always get a game for the most part, but as time goes on, it's going to be harder and harder to get that kind of stuff. And when you factor all these things in, when you kind of combine them all together, you end up with the Vita being simple and watered down and weak and never really achieving the potential that it could. And when it comes to proprietary stuff, when it comes to protecting your device, when it comes to DRM, when it comes to any of that stuff, all these companies need to understand one thing. If the DRM has a negative impact on your legitimate customers, then it is bad DRM and you should not use it. I get that it's tough to stop things like piracy. I get that it's tough to stop hacking and what have you. But if it comes at the cost of the experience of your customers, no, you cannot go that far. And Sony, you loaded this thing up with lots of proprietary stuff outside of the memory card. The charger was proprietary as well. The Vita is particularly picky about what you plug it into and what it can get a charge from. And even the charge brick itself was proprietary. They had this little like notch etched into it where it really only fit the Vita USB plug. So it's just this combination of things where it's like this, it's trying to be like an Apple device, this walled off unit where everything Vita is Vita, only Vita all the time. But Sony can't pull that one off the way that Apple can. Apple sometimes struggles pulling that off, right? So the sort of locked in experience that they were trying to create with this exclusive, proprietary, gimmicky solutions just didn't appeal well when related to your cell phone. Like if you're going to get mobile games on here, like you can find the same thing on your phone and there's apps and what have you. What's the point of carrying it around? You just carry around your phone, which has better battery life, built-in storage, and it makes phone calls too. Like it's everything that you're going to need. So why carry around a redundant device if it's not going to provide with what it does more than what your phone already has? The Switch is a great example of that. The Switch is bigger than the Vita or the 3DS, meaning it's harder to carry around, but people carry that thing around because it is a full-blown gaming console meant for full-blown gaming console experiences. I need to stop saying full-blown. So when you add all these together, that is not a consumer-friendly experience. And I definitely think it hindered the Vita's ability to kind of grow. In 2015, Sony went on to basically say, yeah, we're ceasing development of Vita games. And I mean, the thing just basically died from there. Even though they only discontinued it a couple years ago, it never felt like it ever really was alive, which is ironic because the whole Vita meaning life thing. It just never really felt like I was walking around finding other Vita users. I mean, I did check, Vita had a lot of interesting apps that would allow you to kind of see other Vita players that were around and interact with them and stuff like that. And, I did see them. But when the console first launched, now I don't really see all that stuff. And, they did go on to add more functionality with their PlayStation Online stuff. You could see your friends, and you could send messages and all this other stuff like that. It became polished and you could do party chat and all that stuff was great. But it never was like an always on experience like you would get from your phone. So there was really no point of it having that because it just hindered its ability to feel like it was meant to do that stuff. And that kind of speaks for, the Vita itself. It did a lot of things that it never felt like it was meant to do. It's not a camera that is going to be better than your cell phone camera. So there's no point of having a camera on here. Sony tried to say that the reason for the camera was for AR. But honestly, their AR solutions were not good. There were some cards, I guess, and you throw them on a table, and it was kind of like a Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic the Gathering type thing, and monsters come out of the cards. Never ever seen that product in my life. I'm sure people bought it, I'm sure people liked it, and I'm sure people used it. But the overall grand scheme of things, holding up your Vita to aim at a table to look at some cards through this, again, your phone can do that, so why would your Vita need to do that? And the front-facing camera, what was that for? It's not like you were getting Snapchat filters and stuff on your face through your Vita. And that's some of the stuff that hindered this. And then all the proprietary aspects, the lack of games. It was just a culmination of numerous things. And that's why I made that PSP 5G video, because if there's a new PSP that's coming out, I want it to be known that a straightforward, simple approach, no gimmicks, hardcore with great specs for things that you are going to be enjoying, specs for things that you're going to be using on a frequent basis with the device. That is where the focus needs to be for any console, for any handheld, for any phone. There's no point of adding it if you're only going to use it, once a year, just because like, oh yeah, that feature, let me go look at that. Or hey, look at, you're showing the feature to a friend, right? But otherwise, there's no point of putting it in there. And I get that in order to be able to find new features and new things, you have to explore new options. And that's kind of the point of a gimmick when it's initially conceived is, this is going to change everything. There is a point, there is a balance, there is a practicality to working with your functions and features. When you're trying to add something new, trying to add something proprietary, there is a limit. There is a way to look at it and say, is this something that's necessary? Do we have something already queued up that's going to make this feature useful? And therein lies why you need games and focus on games and getting those games at all costs. if they use the features and the features are fun, the way that the game uses the features is fun and it adds to the experience, and it doesn't feel like it's just there to be a tech demo. It doesn't feel like it's just there because it's required to be there by, Sony or Microsoft or whomever it is. If it feels like it belongs organically and naturally and it's not forced in, that is how you make those things work, and that is how you progress those things. A lot of the times, honestly, the touchscreen for the Vita, I forget it's even there. The rear touchscreen, the rear touchpad thing, I never even really use. When it's all said and done, the Vita itself is probably one of my favorite consoles personally, but not because of the experience that the Vita brought to me, but because of allowing me to experience all of the other devices and all of the other elements from PlayStation's past, from days of yore, right? PSP and PS1, and I would love to see it had been expanded into PS2. PS3 might have been a tall order for this at the time, but that is honestly what I can say the legacy of the Vita really was a way to look back and play old games, PSP and PS1, and in that regard, it does an amazing job. The fact of having all that stuff in my pocket, being able to play, on the PlayStation controller, right, with the X and the triangle and square, having that experience and not the mobile experience is to me way better. Playing the original Final Fantasy, not the mobile optimized Final Fantasy with touch controls and the change of UI. You don't get that nostalgia factor that way. You don't get that feeling, of recapturing those moments, right? And therein lies where the Vita is like really, really, truly strong, is being able to provide a PlayStation experience on the go. But when the games themselves that were being made for it were mobile focused and were not PlayStation games in the way that PlayStation games are supposed to be, I think therein lies your problem. Now, can I say that this was a complete failure? Yeah, kind of. I still love it though. I love this thing. It's seriously, it's a great unit. And so guys, that about wraps this up. Yes, this is a new series, and I know I have a bunch of series out, and there will be more things coming, but this is the start of complete failure. So if you liked it, throw a like down. If you have a Vita, definitely let me know what your experiences have been like with the Vita, and then definitely please consider subscribing. I'm doing the new thing. Definitely share the video. I think it helps the channel out a lot. As always, talk to you soon.